So we're going to move on to our trending topic, which is a show that everybody's watching. I think it is the most watched show in Netflix history, which is saying something. And it has had tens of millions of viewers already. It is Stranger Things 3. Now, before we dive into this, I will say I'm the only one on the panel who has not seen some or all of this season. My wife has been on the road with her job, and so we've agreed to watch it together. So
how sweet, Dave.
It is very sweet, but no spoilers for me.
You.
You can have mild spoilers about some aspects of relationships, but no biggies, okay? And I already know one biggie that I didn't want to know, so no more. So we're really going to focus on the relationship aspect of the show. One thing that the show does really well is explore different types of relationships and what that looks like under times of stress and times of uncertainty. I love that. Pick a relationship that really fascinates you with the show and talk about the relationship and why you are particularly drawn to it or what it explores psychologically. Emma Kate, do you want to start?
Sure. I guess I would want to talk about Hopper and some of the dynamics for his story arc from what I've seen. I'll be transparent. I've only seen 3 episodes so far, but based on what I've gathered, there's a lot in terms of his significant difficulties with anger management. And I think it's important to talk about his relationship with Elle, or 11, obviously. So I loved this character in season 1 and 2. So we first meet him, and he is still struggling with grief after the loss of his daughter, Sarah. And then season 2, he starts to open up to actually being a parent again for Elle. And I just found that so endearing. And then now in season 3, he actually is her father. But I was really disturbed by some of the things that were happening. So, first episode, without giving away too much, Dave, there's kind of a funny scene where Elle and Mike are making out, and most parents could relate to this, where there's some kind of humor over the 3-inch door rule, and just making sure no funny business was going on. But then his character kind of shifted quickly to very non-humorous aspects, where essentially he threatened or kind of intimidated Mike to not date Elle. And that caused a lot of issues. And I think in episode 3, which is the last one I saw, he kicked open the door to her bedroom thinking they were in there when it was just her and Max hanging out. And so his anger is really upsetting. And I think one thing I keep thinking back to is, is he resenting Mike for taking Elle away from him? I don't know. So maybe we'll see more of that, because it's almost like, is this a Sarah issue from his daughter that he lost? And is there some unresolved stuff there? I would imagine there is. But I didn't like the portrayal so far of his kind of toxic masculinity stuff, and I hope that gets resolved. But I'm a little nervous that it does not.
I have a feeling it will get resolved. I haven't seen the series, but I have a feeling it will get resolved.
Oh, you're making a prediction, huh?
Yeah. Dave with his predictions. Frank, same question.
It circles back to my favorite character, which is Dustin, but it's really about the relationship between the original 4 and just going on adventures, but the way, you can look at all these interactions through the eyes of each of the different characters and sort of the baggage that they bring. But Dustin always seemed to be the kid who was level-headed. He was, when crazy stuff is going on, he points that out. He's like, guys, he's sort of the surprising leader. He's goofy, confident in a way that I really didn't think he could be, but I saw him as sort of the glue among those friendships, that he binds them together, and was sort of the hero of the show for me.
Jonathan, what stood out for you in terms of a relationship in particular with this season?
This season, it really is Dustin and Steve, because you see the origins of their friendship in season 2, where Dustin basically breaks off from the rest of the group, and he recruits Steve. And Steve gives him some not so great advice about girls, but Dustin really teaches Steve how to be brave. And it's a really tender, interesting dynamic to where, just from an age standpoint, you assume that Steve was taking care of him. But the reality is there's this mutual give and take in terms of that relationship. And then you see here in season 3, it's kind of the same thing. Like, you see how over time, over a year's time since the season 2, it's like they really see each other almost like best friends now. Mm-hmm. And there's more enthusiasm when they reconnect than with the larger group, because they're off really exploring relationships and other things. And Dustin and Steve really go on their own separate mission. And they just have, the characters themselves have chemistry. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, you see, even with that dyad, there's 2 other characters that form that mission in season 3, where Erica, Lucas's younger sister, who is so sharp-witted and just funny. And then Steve has a coworker named Robin, and you see all of this dynamic and mm-hmm. that quartet play out. I think it's the heart and soul of this season, because I feel like compared to previous seasons, their growth feels in line with how they've been developed the first 2 seasons. I feel like a lot of the other relationships kind of take some clunky pivots where it feels more of a writer's arc rather than fleshing out a character and progressing them.
And also, like, over all 3 seasons, the relationship between Dustin and Elle, or 11, because I can't remember exactly how it was in the first 2, but I know in this one, he's sort of, despite lying to his mom about the thing, which... You know what I'm talking about? Doesn't matter. Despite telling his mom a lie, he has this moral high ground, and whenever 11 was like going to use her power in a way that maybe she shouldn't, he would call her out. He would sort of stake a claim, and I think that's also along the lines of teaching bravery. But I thought that was an interesting relationship over the whole series.
Part of the appeal of the show, it appeals on many levels. One's on just the level of pure nostalgia. Another is on the level of the fantastic and the more fantasy and horror aspects. And really the heart of it is what we're talking about, is the relationships. That's what distinguishes this show. And you all talked about at least 3 types of relationships: parent-child relationships, romantic relationships, and friendships, peer friendships. Let me start with that last one. Do you think the show does a good job of depicting peer friendships of kids this age, particularly in that era, but really in any era? Do you think it does a good job? Does it feel authentic to you from what you know about kids this age and their peer relationships?
I'd say absolutely.
Yeah.
That show couldn't... It seems like it would be difficult to make that show in today's day and age, because kids aren't doing adventures. So when I was in 1983, 1984, I was doing absolutely every single thing they were doing. D&D, the arcade, going to the mall, Orange Julius, listen to the same music. It was like exactly the same thing.
Orange Julius. You had to make sure you threw that in.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I never see an Orange Julius.
I don't know what that is.
Get some soda at the AM PM.
Yeah.
You know.
But I think they absolutely nailed that era. But the relationships, especially between the kids, felt very, very, very familiar to me. It felt very much like me in the 8th grade.
Well, even developmentally, when you see that, just as an example, so, the kids are starting to explore relationships and, dating, and that there's kind of a little bit of a mismatch with Will, who is this kid who, for the first 2 seasons, experienced significant drama, obviously. And so he's kind of stuck socially and emotionally in terms of his development, where he's really wanting to still live out his childhood, and he's lagging behind that of his peers. And that really fits appropriately with trauma. And we see that where these kids will maintain and kind of regress back to earlier things because that's what they feel safe with. And it's also them trying to process what's happened and figure things out.
Well, when you think about the 80s, the time period that it's referencing or mimicking in a lot of ways, most of its cultural references are movies. So I think it's really interesting to watch the friendships evolve over the course of several seasons. I think back to 80s TV shows. Kids, Different Strokes, Silver Spoons, Webster, Family Ties, and those shows were not purely centered around kids as friends growing up together. And so number one, I think the 80s did a good job of television shows, the ones I just referenced, of kids actually playing kids. Whereas you think about the 90s, you think about like Saved by the Bell or 90210, those people look like they should be doing my taxes. They're so old looking.
I thought they looked real.
And
Yeah, you did.
I did.
Real.
and I think one of the things I appreciate about this season, even if I don't necessarily think it was as successful overall of a season, is that it's showing the natural arc of just because people are close friends at some point in childhood, it doesn't always play out that way where you remain this intact core friendship. And that really was in season 2 when Max was introduced. You started to see the splintering of like this friend group, what becomes outsiders versus insiders. And I think the show hits our nostalgic pop culture references of that time more so than it maybe fully encapsulates, which I don't expect any television show to do, but it really focuses on geeks in Midwestern, small towns, suburbia. That's the Steven Spielberg encapsulated 80s in a lot of ways.
And I feel like we can't neglect Steve's storyline too, because honestly, his seems so authentic, where here was this wildly popular high school boy in season 1 and 2, and now he's finished school. He's working at the food court mall. And I remember seeing him in his little like sailor's outfit. That was hilarious. And also
I thought it was hot.
I felt really embarrassed for him, but you can just sense that classic identity development piece at these different stages where for him, Steve, he has to figure out, okay, well, what are the kinds of relationships that I want to have? Who do I want to be? What do I want to do with my life? And that's a kind of a different identity stage for the younger kids in terms of what they're working through. And I felt like his stuff was really, you could relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would argue again that the show's success isn't just that it is a scary, fantastic, kind of semi-horror show, or that it even has all these nostalgic references. I think those things are obviously part of the appeal. I think the show's success is really tied to these particular kinds of relationships and the authenticity of them and the fact that people can connect to these characters. So let me ask them about... Go ahead.
I would like to maybe talk to some 14, 15-year-old kids and ask them, like, what is your draw to this show? Because they don't get the references.
Right.
And is it possible that they're really drawn to it because they're seeing kids out there being independent, doing their own thing, not having a lot of supervision? Yeah. And that maybe they want that.
Again, for the record, I don't get a lot of the references either.
I know you don't.
So, not because I'm stupid.
Okay, sure.
Frank.
Let's go with that.
Last question then. Talk about the romantic relationships in the show and whether, in particular, you feel like they are authentically portrayed.
I can't help but talk about Hopper and Joyce.
Yep.
Because his anger issues bleed into that relationship as well. So in season 2, Joyce lost Bob in a very horrible way. And it makes 100% sense that she is still struggling with that, not ready to date. and Hopper kind of almost tricking her into a date, saying it wasn't a date. But then when she got distracted by figuring out an important part of something, Dave, she just unintentionally stood him up. And then when she tried to share that this was happening and all he could fix, like he just was fixated on the fact that she went over to the school science teacher's house and he was just rude and ugly towards her. And I know there's been some discussion online with like Evan Rachel Wood talking about how a lot of the things that his character portrays could be comparable to gaslighting and abusive relationships. And without having seen all the episodes, I don't know if that's going to pan out that way, but I'm sure it could be accurate, and I don't like that.
And that criticism online makes me crazy. It's a show. It's a character. You want to get rid of that quality of a character? Like, give me a freaking break. That made me insane.
But so in their defense, I had a really strong reaction to this because I loved him.
That's the point.
But that's what I'm saying, though. Like, a lot of some of the characters, their storyline kind of continues and their development continues appropriately. And I felt like this pivot for him just kind of caught me off guard. And then I'm just trying to sit there and rationalize, okay, well, why would he be like this? Like, why would he be doing this right now? And I want to find out more because I hope he isn't just turning into a giant jerk. And so
it's his trauma. It's taking on the responsibility of Elle, not wanting to lose another child. Like that, it's just making him crazy.
But I think it's good to have conversations about it.
I don't.
So even when people are
not
angry
even with you
online,
nope.
Well, I'm trying to stay calm, and you're being reactive. So.
I will tell you this: in terms of the romantic relationships, there's one part of this show that I don't want to see children making out. I don't want to see that. It was just nope. Don't need to see that scene.
Do you hear that, Netflix? What Frank wants, give him. Because this is clearly a show made for a 50-year-old man.
It feels creepy to see kids make out. It just felt really creepy to me.
Have you seen your children make out with other kids? Is that why? I think that might be why. I'm pretty sure.
Well,
recent issue.
I do think the romantic arcs is one of the show's shortcomings. I think the show has a real problem that it has to address, which is these kids are getting older and romance and attraction starts to become more central in peer relationships. But the other is that they keep adding more characters. And I really felt this season, more so than previous seasons, some of the new characters they introduced were very charming and they were fleshed out. And because we didn't know them, it allowed an opportunity to get to know them through their characterization and arc. But other characters are very thin this season. And so, like, I think Hopper and Joyce, if there was more room for them to breathe and to have more data points, I think some people might have a little bit more sympathy or understanding of some of those dynamics that Frank is addressing, but it's so short. Like, it's so brief, it feels like he turns on a dime.
Yeah, I get that.
I feel Lucas is really AOL this season. I think his relationship with Max doesn't make sense to me because she seems to be very feisty and independent, but at one point, Lucas is telling Mike, oh, she's broken up with me 5 times, but gotten back together. And so, like, well, what does that mean if we really want to talk about healthy relationships of, like, what's going on there? And so I think the Duffer Brothers have a dilemma they got to figure out, and that's what happened with Walking Dead. Too many characters. And then because it became too many characters, it was like, well, then we got to get rid of some. And then they totally would project. You could tell who's going to die. Because they get their whole episode, and you're like, oh, they're a goner at the end of this one. So,
yeah. Well, fascinating stuff. Good conversation. And if you have some thoughts about Stranger Things 3, particularly about the relationships in it, we'd love to hear from you. You can tweet us at @shrink_tank or write us at feedback@shrinktank.com. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Shrink Tank Podcast. If you like the episode, you can help our podcast grow by giving us a high rating on iTunes and also telling your friends about us and hope that they will subscribe. For more content exploring the intersection of psychology and pop culture, you can visit shrinktank.com. We have great articles and videos and polls and quizzes and all kinds of good stuff there. Follow us on Twitter at @shrink_tank and like us on Facebook. And if you're watching us on our YouTube channel, which we hope you are, we'd love for you to subscribe. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, so check out the description box below. Our producer and theme music composer is Sean Beck. Our associate producer and social media guru is Mariel Butler. And our marketing intern is Sarah Bradley. For Emma Kate Wright, Jonathan Hedderly, and Frank Gaskell in Charlotte, I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. Tell all your friends about us and make it a great week.